The following program discusses sensitive issues related to addictive behavior. Parents are cautioned that some material may be too candid for younger children.
Welcome to Celebrating Life in Recovery. I'm Cheri, your host. You know what surprises me about God is the miracles He performs. And sometimes I think a changed life is a bigger deal than raising the dead. Today, I'd like to introduce you to a friend of mine, owned a bunch of strip clubs, and I think only God can bring something good out of a strip club. Come join us on the set. When I talk about does anything good come up from a strip club, I mean that. When I went, a few years ago, I'm doing this program, Celebrating Life in Recovery. We got a bunch of guests coming in. I love doing this. And I know that you know that, and you can see that, and you get to meet some incredible folks. I get to meet some incredible folks. But one time I come in, and there's a guy here I'm supposed to interview, and I don't know a lot about him. So I said, oh, who is he? What does he do? And they said he owns, his family owns a number of strip clubs. And I'm thinking, what? And I didn't even know what was in me, but I felt rage. I felt all of a sudden I couldn't even hardly breathe. I don't want to walk in the room. I don't want to introduce myself to this guy. I don't want to talk to him. And I realized my sister is in the hospital, hooked up on life support. She's trying to kill herself. She's a stripper turning 50. She's got 3 DUIs. She's got the IRS after her. And when she dies, the person that owns the strip club is just going to put another girl in there and not even remember her name. And I am so angry. I'm thinking, you know what? I can't. Not today. I can't do this. And the people are looking at me like, because usually I'm nice. And I'm serious. Usually I'm nice and I love God and anybody can heal and all of that kind of stuff. And I believe that with everything in me. But that moment, I thought, you know what? I just want to shoot him. I want to walk in and shoot him in the face. Right? Excuse me. For people that haven't seen this program before, it was just that intense for me. And so I walk in and I'm trying to be nice. Hi, my name is Cheri. And everything in me just thought, I'm dying. And I walk out and JD, one of the pastors here, whom I love, I feel like he is my pastor, but I walk out and he's like, do you want to pray, because he's looking at me like, what's up? Something's obviously up. And I said, I can't do this, And so he says, let's pray. And then he comes up with an idea that's ridiculous. He said, why don't you ask this guy, Michael, if you could process your rage while you're doing the show? And I'm thinking, how funny is that? So I walk in and I just said, you know that I don't like you. That, all of this kind of stuff, that I'm raging, all that kind of stuff. Can we just process that during the show? And, this is a big guy, but his knees were shaking. He was like, okay, And so we get on the show, and I open the program up. If you've ever seen it with, when I first met this guy, spiritually speaking, I had both of my hands around his neck. Did you feel that, Michael? And he's like, I did. Can we talk about that? And within a short period of time, he literally turns around and starts telling his story. And when he told his story, my heart broke. My heart broke. I thought, what? Did I think I was the only victim here? Do I think I'm the only one in need of grace? Do I think that God himself doesn't look at all of us and say, man, I love you, and draws us to himself. So we're talking about this whole season and about grace and about forgiveness. And I didn't even realize that I had so much anger and I had so much bitterness and I had so much stuff. But I realized at that moment when I'm listening to this man talk about his background is that I have to really say, please forgive me. And at one point in the show, I just started crying. And Michael looked at me and he said, I don't know if anybody's ever asked you this, but would you forgive me as a club owner? And I just couldn't hardly stand it. And I said, would you forgive me in my arrogance, that I thought forgiveness wasn't for you too. And we both looked at each other and realized that God had done a miracle. I needed to forgive him. He needed to forgive me. We needed to step into the arms of God and let him heal us. And so today we're going to talk with one of his brothers. I no longer feel rage. I'm no longer that arrogant, and I no longer have all of that bitterness. So I want you to stay with us. And man, I hope by the end of this program, you are just proud of God. So stay with us. We'll be right back.
The following program discusses sensitive issues related to addictive behavior. Parents are cautioned that some material may be too candid for younger children.
You know, even when I tell that story about Michael and the strip club owner and my sister, I could remember that moment of rage. And there's a part of me that says, man, I'm glad it came up because I didn't know it was there. And it allowed me to look at this guy and say, you know what, I'm so sorry. But it also allowed me to go to God and say, man, I had no idea that I had that much bitterness and anger to a whole group of folks, and repent of that. And God did some amazing healing. It was absolutely amazing. So if you get something that comes up, don't get freaked out. Just go to God. But I wanted to say my next guest, Aaron, and I can't ever pronounce your last name.
Bekkela.
Bekkela. And so I love you. But did Michael ever tell you that story?
He did.
What did he say? What was his perspective?
He, I think, probably similar to yours, just awkward, uncomfortable. I think more than anything, he focused on the end result, and that it worked out really well, I think, was his big deal.
It was amazing to me at one point when he stopped and said, you know, I don't know if any of the club owners said to you, please forgive me. Mm-hmm. So I am on behalf of anyone that hurt you. Please forgive us. And then, you know, for God himself to help me to realize that I needed to let go of that anger. And it was just so powerful. It was the entire studio. You could see the healing in the entire studio. And him and I are friends to this day. He went back and got his degree as a pastor and is now working out there. So I want your story is a little bit different than his. So tell us, first of all, where did you come from? What was your life like growing up?
You know, growing up, it was, for me, I thought it was normal. I grew up in a house. My mom was there all the time. My dad was there sporadically. But we had a house, I had shoes, I had friends at school, whatever, what have you. It wasn't until my adolescence when I realized maybe this isn't so normal. Once I realized what Dad was doing and what the business was.
So talk about the business, because your family was very successful.
Sure.
Owned?
I don't even know how many. I couldn't even tell you how many, because it would go from one to the next, some would get sold and such. So I mean, it just kind of evolved or from one to the next.
So on the number of strip clubs, right. The business, family business was dancers, bars, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's all I ever knew. That was from the time I was a little kid until I understood what they were going through school and such. So yeah, that was all I ever knew. I remember the first time that I ever got any inclination of what was going on was I went to work with Dad one day. And what it was he had bought a club and we were painting. So when I went in there, I don't know if I was 10 or 12 or how old I was, but I remember going in there and just thinking, that smell, just that the booze or the cigarettes or the perfume or whatever, just this like really thick smell. And even in the midst of painting, I mean, you have paint fumes there and stuff like that, but I mean, it was just this really strong smell. And so as I aged and as I went on, it was things like that where I realized probably not everybody knows that smell.
Right.
And so anyway, yeah.
But I love what you're saying, because you said, you know what, as far as family-wise, this was normal.
Yeah.
When you walked in my home, you would see a normal family, mom, dad.
On the surface, for sure.
Okay.
On the surface, as I got older, you know, a lot of it was coming to the understanding that Dad's not home. He's going to come home maybe once or twice a week. It was very difficult for my mom. As things went along, I originally thought, man, Mom, why don't you just, I mean, everybody gets a divorce, just get a divorce or whatever, you know, and my perception of my mother from my adolescence to where I'm at now it's like, oh my, what an amazing person, durable and stayed there for the rest of us, you know.
Right.
And then they did ultimately get a divorce, but it was just a real range of emotions going like through the high school years and stuff like that.
Did you ever feel shame?
Absolutely.
Okay, because for me growing up, I had that sense of shame all the time. When did that happen for you and what was it like?
I think as I gained an awareness of what the business was and what was going on, and you know, for my guy friends, unfortunately in our culture, it was pretty much cool. But I remember that sense of embarrassment when you would meet somebody, or something. I was very active in sports, so you know I would get exposed to a lot of people, and so what do your parents do? What do my parents? You know, and so I would just say, oh, well, my dad owns a bar, and hopefully they would leave it at that and not dig any deeper. But yeah, once I never realized that there was guilt and shame even then. But oh yeah, absolutely, for sure.
Always hiding. So, you know, at one point, so you were successful in school, into sports, the club and your academics kind of weren't mixing. You were able to do both. At one point, you started working in the clubs. What was that like?
You know, I worked with Dad a little bit, and then there was also my brothers, as you mentioned, Michael. There was 2 other brothers as well. So I mean, it was just kind of tangled into everything. We're pretty avid in the outdoors and did a lot of hunting and such, so that was just part of the conversation, you know, and part of what we did. So I mean, it was, even if you weren't in the club or actually working there, there was still an awareness, maybe, would be a way to put it. So as far as me actually starting to work, I had decided to go a different route and spend a short time as a police officer.
No way.
And yeah, and wasn't very long, but went through a few critical incidents, and I did fine. I performed well or whatever, but it really made me look, is this what I want to do? Well, then I have my father and my brothers sitting waiting the whole time, like to essentially reel me in.
Right.
And
what a lot of people don't understand, and they didn't understand that on any level when I found Christ either, is the money involved in clubs, the money involved in drugs, the money involved in dance, you know, in the sex trade industry or in that kind of adult entertainment stuff is off the chart.
It can be. It comes and goes, but the overall average certainly is well above what it should be for the job that's done. That's for sure. So yeah, once I my brothers and my dad kind of stepped in. Hey, why don't you just come work with us? Why don't you know whatever? And unfortunately, I made the choice to go ahead and do that, and made the decision to transfer then. So that would have been roughly mid-20s. Was when
So mid-20s, and if this is too personal, you could just tell me. But for that kind of exposure, anything. I mean, did you get lost in anything? Sexual addictions, any of that stuff? Because you know, and so visually, the things that you're seeing is not typically what a teenager or early 20s tends to see.
You know, I think I became pretty desensitized to a lot of things. I don't think I had any addiction issues, any sexual addictions, or any drugs. I never really done any drugs or anything like that. However, alcohol was where I found would be my go-to, would be my escape, would be my, and it wasn't so much with everybody else. It was just by myself. And that was something that carried with me for the entire time I was there. So.
Yeah, I could imagine that you would be very fair in your job. I think that when you came in and now start working for the club, you're the manager there now. Just ran it like a business.
Yeah, for sure. You know, and again, I think part of our culture, that's part of it. The perception is that of, you know, this seedy individual or this whatever, you know, and that's not the way it is today. Today, it's, you know, one of the biggest purveyors has his master's degree in business, you know, and I mean, it's a suit and a tie, or it's a regular guy, so to speak. And yeah, I think I fit that mold pretty well. I think I was very disarming to a lot of people that came in, you know, and it's funny you mentioned that. I I had over social media a message that came through, and it was one of the girls saying, well, why have I never apologized? And so, of course, I sent it back, you know, and I let her know why, through this whole process, that's almost like the umbrella over all of it is, yeah, I'm sorry. Anyone's life that you affected and that it was negative. I mean, you know, as you look back on everything, it becomes very clear. So
it's a whole different thing. But I love what you're saying is that at one point, people could say this is a seedy thing, and these are kind of really characters that are kind of almost carnival workers and druggies or whatever. But nowadays, that is not true. This is a business, ran like a business. There's a lot of money in it. And so what you're saying is times have changed. Even the girls that are seduced or drawn into the business are drawn into different reasons than they did maybe 30 years ago.
Well, I think, again, not to keep beating it, but our culture's changed. You know, 30 years ago, if you received one of these lingerie magazines in the mail, people would have freaked out. Well, nowadays, it's just like, just going through the mail, you know, I mean, it's commonplace. So, yeah, I think they're very desensitized to it. It's more accepted.
So you're working in the clubs. At one point, you're questioning all that. How did that come about?
Michael.
Yeah.
Michael would have been maybe the symbolic point. But again, my mother, I think that whole time, she herself kind of transitioned to a spiritual place when the problems were, because it reached a point while I was in high school where I would come home and my mother would be crying or whatever, you know, and so that would be part of it.
She's like, I can't do this anymore.
Right. And I almost wonder if she was waiting until I was out of high school, you know what I mean, like what it was, and maybe my dad for that matter too. But at any rate, she was always there, always kind of had that nurturing nature to her, just a helping personality, you know. So there was always that there, but yeah, Michael, when we were up hunting, and we're sitting there, and he's like, so I got to ask you something. I've never asked you to do anything, but I'm going to ask you to do something. And so at this point, he's already going to school and everything, and so I'm sitting here thinking, oh my,
he's found Jesus.
What are you about to ask me, right? And so he just hands me a Bible, and he says, well, will you just read this book? You know, and it was, I always think back of Michael, and I think that was smart of you. He's like, it's the #1 selling book. It's ever, you know, like kind of trying to appeal to the worldly side of me, because that's kind of who I was. And okay, fine, Michael, I'll read it, you know. And I always joke with him. I said, next time, tell someone to start in the New Testament, so that it's maybe a little more relevant, and they're not getting stuck with the thous and such. But at any rate, he gave it to me, and I ultimately did read it.
You know, because what's really interesting is I see your mom and your mom looking at these beautiful boys and knowing that each one of her sons is going to be lost in an industry that she can't even hold on to her husband in. Right. And now her sons are going there. And I could imagine that she panicked with that.
Oh, for sure. And one of my sisters was also a waitress and bartender for a while. Yeah. So yeah, it was very difficult for her.
And so Michael comes out, and just somehow he's got to reach you guys.
Yeah, and he was smart about it. He just kind of periodically, so did you read that, you know, and so I did. And
you did, just opened up the book.
Yeah, page 1, started reading. And it took me a while, but I did read it, and it was, I think at first it was just the history was I found it interesting. Yeah. If nothing else, it was an interesting read, and I kept reading and kept the different stories I thought were interesting. But for sure, once I got,
I just gotta say, and I'm trying to let this just kind of play out like it happened in your life, but I can't imagine what heaven did when you were sitting there with a Bible, finding that interesting. I think the angels rejoice it. I think God himself are going like, come on. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's what an amazing place for this man to be, is that I'm in the Word of God. It's not really, feels like it's not affecting me much, but I'm liking the stories.
Well, yeah, and you know, I think that's the important part, is the Word of God. You know, everything I had learned to that point or been taught, or it was certainly a very taboo subject in my house with my dad's history and such.
The Bible.
Yes, anything Christian was not welcome in our house. So And at this point in time, my dad is essentially dying with cancer. So, so yeah, I mean, it was the way everything played out. You know, by the time I got to the Gospels and was reading them, I was pretty well hooked. You know, and Stacy and I, we were transitioning, moving, and we received a flyer in the mail, and it was one of the evangelistic series or whatever that I don't know if you know Hiram, but
Yes.
Hiram was doing it. Gifted speaker, very cool man. And so we talked about
On
it.
prophecy.
Yes. And that was part when I was in the New Testament that I'm reading about, and I'm trying to connect these dots and having a hard time, and then being back in work, and just, I mean, it was a really crazy time. Yeah. So, but we get this flyer.
So, you know, I just said, because our whole season is going through a book on victory in Jesus and how amazing grace is. And Romans 2:4, when it says, don't despise the kindness of God or the forbearance of God, because as He's literally taking you through the Bible and you're working in a strip club, He is saving your life. And somebody would be going like, God doesn't do that. Oh, yes, He does.
Yeah.
You know, and you just have to say, God, how cool are you? I mean, absolutely says, I'll be right where you're at.
Right. Well, it gave me a whole new perspective. Everything that I had been told or heard, that's not at all what I'm reading. You know, and so when that flyer came, I asked Stacy, I said, well.
So Stacy, your wife,
right,
was a dancer in the club.
Correct.
And what is she thinking even with you going through the Bible? She must be going like, what's up? What are you doing?
Well, she had a time in her life when she was younger that she would tell you were like her best years when she was younger with a grandma she was staying with, and they would go to church, and so for her, she was really okay with it.
Okay.
And so when we get that flyer, I ask her, I'm like, well, so do you think we're going to ignite in the seat, or should we go, or should we, you know, because I really wanted to understand it better. That was where I was at, and I wanted to connect those dots, you know, Daniel and Revelation, and how does this all work, and you know, so we ended up going, and it was interesting.
I love what you said to me one time about this part of your journey, is that walking in the church, you were like trying to hide your face.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
yeah.
I don't want anyone to recognize me.
Well, and then I stopped and I thought, well, nobody that I see on a regular basis is going to be in here and recognize me. But yeah, for sure. I mean, it's just like I just want to understand, and then I want to leave, you know. And so while we were in there, this tall pastor sees us, and it is, you're just like, stop looking at me, because now you're going to come talk to me, you know. And so yeah, one of the pastors at the church that was putting on the series, Jim
Moon, he's a really good friend of mine.
Yep. Jim Moon came over, and from there, then I met the other pastor, Roger, and before I knew it...
So well, hold up, because I know what Jim asked you. What did he ask you when he walked up to you?
The same thing as just like when I was a kid. So what, instead of what do your parents do, so what do you do for a living? And I literally told him, I said, well, you want to sit down for a minute? And so that we sat down and chatted about it.
So you didn't decide to hide from him?
No, I didn't. But a lot of it was how he approached me. I mean, it wasn't this condescending, you know, stiff neck, like, oh, well, thanks for coming, you know, not at all.
I have never seen him judge anyone.
No, he was perfect for me to meet, you know.
So in the church building, going through a Revelation seminar, finally being open with even your background, and nobody ignited, nobody. No. Do you know what I mean? It was all good.
Right. And then from there, I met Roger, who was also with the pastor there. And before all was said and done, the series ended, and Hiram and I have stayed friends since then. We've hunted together and such. But then he left and was going on where, I forget where he lived at the time. He's lived a little bit everywhere, but then I met Roger and ended up starting doing Bible studies with Roger while I was running the club.
Still running the club.
Still running the club.
So, and the reason I want to say that, because I think it's amazing to me, is that, man, I know people that 7, 8, 10 years God walked with them in their journey before they started letting go of some of the darker stuff. And God was so faithful. And so to me, sometimes we want to jump in and judge, but God says, do not. You will hurt them.
Yeah, and that's not how any of them were. All three of those men were perfect. They met me where I was at every time, and there were times where it wasn't such a nice place to meet me. It was
Because?
I had made up my mind that Stacy and I talked about it, you know, like, what do you want to do when you grow up? Well, what do we want to do with the rest of our life? Because this is not what we want to do. So we literally just sat down and decided, well, if we were going to go back to school, what would we do? And if we, you know, just like kind of like, you know, big piece of paper, what do we want to do, you know? Yeah. And so I decided that, well, both of us decided we wanted to go back to school. And so I was going to go back to school. I applied for school and was accepted. We needed to kind of sell the house on the hill and scale things back.
Nice house.
Yeah, it was a nice house. But scaling things back, anticipating this change, and then I wanted to be legally severed from the bars and everything. I didn't want to have anything to do with them anymore. So applied for school, was accepted, had the house for sale, and was working with one of the bigger sharks in the tank. I don't know how else to put it. That owns clubs.
Was thinking about buying your clubs out, buying you out.
Correct. And so everything was going great. You know, we had it on a path where this is what we're going to do.
I just have to say, because I think I kind of met you before then, but I remember at one point sitting there and listening to you and talking about people buying and selling clubs and stuff. And I remember looking at you and thinking, wouldn't it be funny if God just flipped one of these and one of the clubs become a church? And I don't think that we ever, it was just something that I thought, wouldn't that be so like God?
Right.
But this guy is not going to flip it. He wants to actually keep the business
He's going to write
going.
a check and it's done.
Yeah.
And
a big
for me
check.
at the time, that was perfect.
Yeah.
I can start school now and then just get the house, you know, like that would be fine, you know. And because part of it for me, much like with Michael, I couldn't force my brothers. I couldn't make them, if this is what they choose to do, that's what they choose to do.
Right.
So for me, it was as much as I had the thought crossed my mind too, but I couldn't force that round peg in the square hole. So yeah, everything was going good, and right up until the time when the guy that was going to do it decided he didn't want to do it anymore, and so the deal, so to speak, fell through, and I was accepted to school, I believe, in 2013, and I didn't go back and for a couple of years there because it just threw everything in a tailspin.
Right. And you're saying, God, where are you?
Very much so.
Yeah.
Was quite
You promised me.
Right. Well, for me, and I don't know how else to put it other than like that wasn't part of the deal. I'm doing this and I'm that, and I'm upholding my end of the deal.
I'm walking
where
away
are you?
from everything.
Right. Where are you? Where are you in all this? You know. And I think I kind of started telling you about it. I had a moment where I'm not a very emotional person, and I had woke up one morning and I had just had it, and I went and I sat down in the shower, I turned the lights off and everything, and I was literally just breaking down, and I was really letting God have it, and just that I upheld my end of the deal. Where are you? And very, very colorfully letting him know that I wasn't impressed.
Right.
And but as it continued, I remember literally just throwing my hands out and telling him, "You do it." A little more colorfully than that, but literally those words, "You do it." So I got myself together and I got out of the shower and I just went on with my morning like I normally would. And I went out and I turned the computer on and there were 3 emails. I don't remember what the other 2 were, but part of the conversation with God was that I wanted him to make it very obvious. I mean, like
the direction.
Right.
Like, what do you want me to do? Where do you want me to go?
A big whiteboard with bright letters so I don't get this wrong, because apparently I'm not doing this right. And I found that was the problem. I'm not doing this right.
Absolutely.
And when I got out of the shower and I told him, "You do it," I came out, I literally got on the computer. I hadn't talked to the college in like a year at that point. And one of the 3 emails was from school. "Are you going to come to school or not? We can only hold your acceptance open so long." And I remember just sitting back thinking, wow, It's not a whiteboard and bright letters, but it's black and white. I mean, it's
pretty clear.
And what are the chances of that? You know, because at that point in time, I'm still factoring like, is this even real? Is it? You know, what's going on here? Is this?
It's the hardest thing, Aaron, and I know that like you're saying that through the story, but the hardest thing is that we are not in control. That we've tried to control it up to this point, and it got us exactly where we're at. And there's got to be a point where we say to God, "Okay, I am done." When somebody says, "What does surrender look like? What does it look like to finally say the best of what I can do is not working?"
Right.
You do it.
And that was just it too, you know. And I think I started telling you about my analogy that I had in my head was that every morning I would walk out there and God would be like sitting at the table with a newspaper and peer over and go, "Nope, not ready yet," and keep going. And
He's
I'm
not
sitting here
asking
going,
me a thing.
"Wait a minute, I've done this and I've done, you know, like all these things, and it's not happening." And after I read that email, because that was it, I wanted to go to school, we needed to get the house sold, and I needed to be legally separated from the business.
Yeah.
And so when I read that, I remember sitting back and going, well, that's one of the things, you know, and me and all my boldness going, well, we still have the house and we still have, you know. So at that point in time, we had actually just listed the house again. So we had people, this all occurred like, say, a Tuesday or Wednesday.
And you were at your new place.
Right.
And the other place was listed.
No. We were still in our existing house, and so I have that email in the shower on, let's say, Tuesday or Wednesday. We listed the house, I believe it was on a Thursday, and people came to look at it Friday morning and Saturday morning, and my realtor called me Saturday morning. And he said, and I assumed because he still had to bring the flyers out and stuff like that, so I didn't think anything of it. We had it listed the 2 summers previously with not a single offer. So he calls me, he says, well, that's it, we're done. A full price, just done. And so now I'm really sitting there going, whoa, okay. And so I call my brother, because, you know, we weren't just in business together, we were all friends, you know, we still get along really well. And so I called, not Michael, but one of my other brothers, Rob, and I told him, I'm like, you're not gonna believe this, because he knew the house had been listed and hadn't sold, and he knew what I wanted to do and such, so I told him, and he was like, oh, well, that's cool, you know, he's like, so what about the business? What, you know, he's like, because you're serious. I bet you want to go back to school, you know.
Absolutely.
And, well, yeah, I told people if I could reach to the phone and smack him in the back of the head and be like, well, what part don't you think I'm serious about, you know? And he says, well, I've been thinking about something. And I said, well, what's that? And he's like, well, what if he owned part of the building? He says, well, what if I give you the building, and I know that's not enough, so I'll like make some payments to you or what, you know, but you'd be legally severed, you'd be, you know. And I said, write it on a napkin. So I mean, in like 10 days, I went from, fine, you do it, which I think was the key. Right. I think that was him going, okay, sit down, now we can talk.
And even, because I think we all get to that place of surrender, but it's not a surrender in words only.
No,
it was a
I was
surrender to
done.
the core of who you are.
I knew I
am screaming, cussing, I am angry at God, and when I said you do it, it was literally you do it.
There was some colorful language, for sure.
And even when someone says, you know, I've said that before, saying you surrender and actually surrendering is 2 different things. And so when I think God says, you know what, if you're serious and you're giving me control of your life, I'll show you the plan that I have.
Right.
And he started coming through in every way.
So I mean, there I am in like 10 days. I'm going back to school. The house is sold, and now I'm legally out of the business.
Well, you know and you know this is true. When you and I talked, I, as a ministry, I tried to raise funds to buy that club.
We talked about it.
Because I thought, man, I want to turn it into a church, a media center to help people. And I talked to everybody I could, and that was not God's plan. But what happened? What was the plan?
And that was just it. You know, one of the maybe unique stories or sub stories or whatever to this was while I was still in the business, I had I don't remember her name. I don't remember really what she looks like. I remember she had dark hair and was probably around 20. But the way the club was laid out up in the front was where there was an office, and many times when there was a shift change, we would do the paperwork up there, and often the girls would come and sit up there and wait for their ride or what have you, you know. So I was sitting up there, and she told me, she says, Aaron, can I ask you something? And it felt like this trick question, like, okay, what do you want to ask? You know, and she's like, well, actually, I just need to tell you something. I promised my mom. And she said, me and some of the, or she said, her and some of her lady friends at the church have been praying for you. And so I'm sitting there like, oh my, don't ask me to go to church. Like, where is this headed? You know, like, what's going on here, you know? And she's like, no, I just promised her I would tell you that. So I told you that. And I said, well, tell your mom thank you. I knew it was a nice gesture or whatever, but at that point in my life, it was like, okay, yeah, that's great.
Yeah,
we'll see you
didn't
tomorrow.
mean anything to you.
Right. Or so I thought.
Yeah.
You know, and then I remembered it years later, and because she mentioned the church by name. And so after you and I had talked about that and some of those different things, it's a huge church in the area, like a congregation of like 10 or 12,000 or something. I mean, it's a big church. And so I went and I thought, well, I'll go talk to that pastor and let him know, you know, hey, that one of your prayer groups or what, you know, just, I don't know. And so, yeah, one conversation led to the other or whatever. And after I approached him about it, we started just kind of fishing around with it. Well, unbeknownst to me at that point in time, one of like his number 2 pastor there, I'm not sure their structure or whatever, but the lead pastor was Derry, and I talked with him. Well, unbeknownst to me, Rob and one of the other pastors, Mark, were like this close to approaching us there at the club to see if they could, they wouldn't bother business, but they just wanted to come and pray in the parking lot.
Wow.
And so when I went there and I talked to him, and then as things went on and progressed or whatever, one step kind of led to the other, and before we knew it, we were kind of formulating a plan, like, how could we do this? You know, I, of course, had my grand scheme and idea, but, you know, the long and short of it was it happened.
I love the fact, because you brought some pictures of the whole transition from this church, or this club, strip club, been in this area for how many years?
Since '89.
Since 1989, is now transitioned into a house of God.
It's up and running.
I got to go a few weeks ago and just stand in the lobby and just think, man, God, how amazing are you? So in the very neighborhood where people would drive by and know that this was destroying lives, now in that same neighborhood, it's changing lives.
For sure. And that's a lot of it too. I mean, Rob's vision of it was he had gone to a different church away from his church, and that was he wanted to reach the ones that nobody else wanted, so to speak. He wanted the most broken, the most, that's where he was at, you know. And if you go there, I don't know if you were there while they had any service. I mean, he'll be up there in a Harley shirt or a Broncos shirt or what. I mean, he is the epitome of meeting someone where they're at.
Amen.
And yeah, and it's just.
I would like to break for questions, because after we get a few questions, I know that Stacy, your wife, is here. There's a friend of mine here that has struggled with his own addictions. I want to see if they have any questions for you, but then I want to come back and say, because now you are an incredible man of God, raising a family. You did go to school. So I want to kind of cap all of that off, because it is an amazing miracle. So I want to open up, and I know that, first of all, I'd like to talk with you, Donald, because I know that your struggle has been in the area that he's talking about. So do you have any comment or question for Aaron?
Aaron, I just want to say praise God for what you came over. I used to be one of those men that would sit in the seat and watch the dancers, and I'd actually participate in those clubs, and how God brought me out. It almost nearly destroyed me. I saw where I was going, and God showed me where I was heading. And if I would have kept on that path, I would have definitely ended up somewhere horrible. I knew I was ending up in jail. I could have been up there, and it just was bad. So I really want to say I'm proud of what you did. That takes a huge step and a commitment to listen to God, trust Him, and know that He's going to provide for whatever you need and get you out of that mess. So praise God for that.
Thank you, Donald. And Aaron, both Donald and his wife were really lost in addiction. And their whole transition coming out of those sexual addictions and all of that stuff, to me it was amazing when they decided to burn all their toys, burn all their pornography, and let God have control. So, you know, do you have anything to say to him as a guy sitting in the seat?
You know, I do, and I appreciate your words, but I think it's easy to focus on the women in the business, and justifiably so. I certainly don't mean anything other than that. But I think in that gets lost the men that are in it, and the path that goes down too. It's just as bad. It's just as awful. It's just as degrading.
The families that were destroyed.
Absolutely. You know, pay rent or for a kid's birthday, or go to the club, or, you know. I could tell you a story about one man in particular that the day I met him was doing really exceedingly well. And the last I heard about him was, you know, where you were headed. He did go to prison. And we're talking about a family man that literally blew everything he had in and around the clubs, or stemming from the clubs or whatever, you know. And that doesn't mean that happens to everybody.
But it happens.
But it happens. And it's so, I'm happy that a male would ask a question, because it's a big part of it too, for sure.
I know there's a part of me, and I'm sure a part of you, that sometimes just wants to scream out to anybody, "I'm so sorry."
Oh, absolutely.
That sense of, I'm so sorry for the injury that I've caused.
For sure.
And literally knowing that you have to surrender that to God, because Jesus is the only one that can pay that price. You can't pay it. All I can do is change my life.
Well, even coming here, you know, going back through the pictures or whatever, I'm years removed now. And it was like putting on like a coat of guilt and shame again, just kind of walking through it. I'm okay with it now in that sense, where I have a much better grasp on it now. But yeah, you know, and then you hear something like that, for sure. You know, anyone's life where you affected poorly, yeah, I'm sorry. But let's make steps to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Amen. And even for, you know, in the Bible, when there's a place where, you know, Christ himself says, "Can I change out your filthy garments and give you a robe of righteousness?" That we literally are covered in this robe of righteousness. And this is from all of our past, from anything that has followed us, from generational stuff. And so I'm so proud that you're here. And Donald, thank you so much for that comment. And Stacy, you know that I love you. So Stacy, you're Aaron's wife. Do you have anything that you want to add to what he said, or any comments for Aaron?
Possibly just make a comment and say I couldn't be more proud. I was always so very proud, but I mean, when I feel like I couldn't be more proud of the husband that I have, I am every day. So
because of who he is and where he's come.
Absolutely.
How he responds to God.
Yes.
How he responds to you as your
He was always
husband.
good to me, but I mean, this is just above and beyond.
You know, when you say that, Stacy, most people would think, oh, in that business, he probably was abusive and horrible, and in this life he's probably good. But you're saying he was always a good guy.
Always uplifting, always a good father. But I think, you know, you can't run a business like that and raise a family. The two don't go together. So, you know, getting out of that and then doing something that you can, when somebody asks you, well, what do you do for a living? Or I was asked that question all the time. That was an uncomfortable spot to be put in, to have to say, well, you know,
I'm a dancer,
or
I
I dance
work in a
around
club.
that kind of thing and just not answer it straightforward. But now I can answer that question, you know.
Amen. You know I love you.
I love you too, Cheri.
You know, I love you like a sister. So
I
just
feel
have
the
to-
same way about you.
That is cool. So now you've got people around you, including your wife, that says, I'm so proud of who you are. And so, you know, I know that when you saw that email and you're talking about this was from a Christian college.
Yeah.
And you are going to take what?
I got into counseling. I got my master's in counseling and went through that program.
You know what?
which
That
was
cracks
really
me
good,
up.
too.
It cracks me up, because any club owner that I ever worked for from 13 years old on, they are good counselors. Because we come in all stoned and high and full of drama. You have to talk us down and get us to work. So you've been counseling your whole life.
One of the questions on when the application was, has anybody ever told you you should be? And it was like, do I have to tell you who told me I should be? You know? But yeah, you deal with a lot of a lot of things. I mean, you see a lot of not so good aspects of life for sure.
Yeah. Aaron, and I love how God does this with us, but when you start to step into the education and a different job and counseling and having a different kind of hope for the future, what was that relationship like with you and God? What did that feel like?
It was good. It was just really liberating to finally be doing. One of the other questions on that was, why do you want to do this? And for me, it was a simple answer, because I want to become the tool I was supposed to be. And I wasn't really sure what that looked like at the time. I wasn't sure, I can't remember if it was Jim or Hiram, but maybe even Roger, one of them, like, well, have you ever thought about it? And I'm like, no, I am not a pastor, sort of thing, And, but I thought, yeah, but I do want to help people. I want to make a difference. I want to do something where, Stacy mentioned it with being a family man, and I appreciate what she said, but I did my best, but at its best, it wasn't good. When my daughter had her career day at school, that was pretty telling.
Oh.
And it was one of those real wake-up calls of like, wow.
Because she's wanting you, Dad, come and tell them what you do and come and present at career day.
And as I sit here and say about it, I think about, and that's that awareness was setting in for her too, just like it did for me. And now she doesn't have to grow up with that. She doesn't have to be part of that,
Amen.
For her, just a therapist or, whatever. I mean, it can just be, even though it's just like, whatever, for me, that's huge.
That's huge. You ended up getting a degree in counseling, became a therapist.
Yep.
So everything in your family's changed, everything in your life has changed. And what's really fun for me is your family has always loved you.
Yes.
So they are proud of you, watching you stand up. The club is flipped and is now a church, the community, everything has changed. And so again, what does that look like? What does that feel like? What kind of things are you getting at work? Do you have anything that you say, you know what, God gave me this scripture or this thing that really kind of solidified it for me?
It's good. But one of the things in reading the Bible for the first time as a 36 or 37-year-old, I try to meet people where they're at to the nth degree. I don't bring it up. I don't anything. But if they do, and there's ways you can bring it up. I can't say that I don't bring it up because I do. But there's what I learned from it was just that, especially in this culture. When I was growing up, being the rebel didn't mean going to church. But in this day and age, that's kind of what it is. I mean, it's a really sensitive subject, so, but generally speaking, it's been good. It's certainly a much more positive, healing sort of approach than not, but.
So what I'm hearing you saying is that God for you demystified the Bible and made it very real. And
Absolutely.
When you actually share that with someone, it's not that you share a scripture, but you share principles of God
Absolutely.
that can make it real, not offensive, and meet them where they're at. And so
Absolutely.
that's part of your counseling.
I feel like people will ask me, so you're a Christian? And I have a really hard time saying, yes, I'm a Christian. Because I feel like in our culture, that's like saying, so your favorite color is blue? And to me, it's like, that's a big deal. Just to say boldly, yeah, I'm a Christian. Well, what I would say is I aspire to be. I'll find out one day if I am.
Amen.
And so for me, I guess I take more of a laid back approach, I think it's been kind of effective, though. I think there's people that I'm able to talk to because of it that maybe wouldn't be as open with others, or maybe not as open with them right away. So,
and do you have an example? Can you think of something, a time where you saw that play out?
For sure. I think a good example would be, of an indirect consequence, if you will. While I was going through, Michael was out and already doing his thing. I was in that process of. And while that happened, my other middle brother, Paul, started having he didn't know how to explain it, but he would go down to one of the other clubs, and he's like, Aaron, he goes, I can't do it anymore. I get there, and it's all but a panic attack. He's like, the best I can do is go sit in the office.
He can't even hardly breathe.
He couldn't do it. He could not do it anymore. He and his wife went out to visit her family. Pretty sure they already lived in Nevada at that point. And this is a really short summary, and you have to understand we're talking about a man who had been in the business for the better part of 30 years. Mm-hmm. And a very handy guy. I mean, never did I worry about him after he got out of the club, but that's a really challenging thing to do something like that for that long. I mean, for me, I was getting a degree and was hopeful to get a job. You know, for him, here's where I'm at. Well, he went out to Nevada and put an offer in on a house while he was out there. And I don't remember if it was like right before he left or when he got back or whatever, but he found out that it was accepted. Mm-hmm. So now in about a 10-day period for him too, he went from helping run a club to I'm not only am I quitting my job, I'm leaving the state. And so at the time when that was happening, him and I were in communication. And of course, I just encouraged him. And he said something to me that it even kind of chokes me up right there when I thought about it. He says, you know what, Aaron? He looked up the town that he was moving to. He said, I looked online, there's 27 jobs there, and I need one of them.
Wow.
And I was just like, oh my, you know, because he has a little boy and he wanted to make sure that he...
We're like praying. Go.
Yeah. But I mean, just for him to, I was just like, oh, that is so awesome. So that left my one brother, Rob, left in the business. And so I think the ripple effect, if you will, or if there was, I mean, I was only the tool that I wanted to be in it. Right. But I felt like God was able to shine through with all that. And now today, my other brother, through the midst of all of it, and it's kind of an interesting part, why I still had part of the building. Mm-hmm. And that's how I was able to go to that church and talk with Derry and everything started going, you know, because had I just got out of it, that would have never happened either. Exactly. And so when in the midst of all of that, my other brother finds out he has throat cancer and is starting to have some of these thoughts about what do I, and I said, Robbie, because he's like, well, what would I do? If I get out of the business,
this
what am I going to do?
This is all I know.
Right. And I looked at him and I said, Robbie, what do you want to do?
Amen.
For the first time in your life, what do you want to do? Not what does Dad want us done. What do you want to do? You know? And he's like, well, I would like to get out, you know? And so that's when I was like, so what do you think if, you know? And then it kind of started going in the direction it ultimately ended up in. But so yeah, right now today, none of us are in the business anymore.
You know, I think that we really don't think that when God steps into a family or when God steps into our life and somebody decides to fight for their survival, for their recovery, we don't think what's going to happen to everybody around us. Mm-hmm. And it's not ours to think. I think it would be overwhelming. Mm-hmm. But God just says, I promise you, you start this battle and everything will change. Mm-hmm. And your family, I love even hearing it because I know that everybody really changed. There's some in your family that are still in the business?
No.
No? No. Nieces, nephews?
Nobody's in the business anymore.
How crazy.
That doesn't mean that it can't happen in this culture or whatever. I mean, you say nieces and stuff like that. I mean, it's they're at least they have an example otherwise. So.
Absolutely. We're gonna take a break, but I want you to come back because I want you to talk about kind of that's everybody wants to have somebody they can blame and somebody that's innocent and somebody that's making it and somebody that's not. God doesn't even look at it that way. Never has, never will. So we're going to be right back. Stay with us. Celebrating Life and Recovery.
The following program discusses sensitive issues related to addictive behavior. Parents are cautioned that some material may be too candid for younger children.
Welcome back. You know, we're talking about Aaron and his life. And, you know, his family owned a number of strip clubs. That was their business, and they did it very well. And all of a sudden, God steps in. And I love that. So, Aaron, God steps in. The club gets sold. It is now a church, and incredible. You're now a Christian counselor, went through school, got your degrees, all of that kind of stuff. And so I would like you to say a little bit about, you know, the kind of the bad guy in the story looks like Dad, right? And say a little bit about that.
You know, Michael, actually kind of coined a phrase amongst us with my dad where he was just kind of a bigger than life kind of guy or whatever, and Michael just said, oh, he's just the dark side of John Wayne. You know, and it was something that really, when all was said and done, you know, as he was dealing with cancer and like literally on his deathbed and stuff like that, where as you go through it, yeah, there almost has to be a villain or something, you know, and the frustration.
And at that point, even in his life at that point, he's left your mom, he marries somebody half his age.
Right, he married, it's like a story somewhere that he married the stripper half his age or whatever, and he did. And there were so many things with that, you know, a brand new will that nobody had ever talked about or seen or whatever, literally 3 weeks before he passes comes into play, which just created a chain of events and court and this and that. I mean, it was easy to make him the villain, for sure, because of the past, because of what we were dealing with at that time and everything, but yeah. What do you think about that now?
Now, is he the villain?
No, he's not. He's not. He isn't any different than the rest of us. I think going through everything that I went through and getting my degree especially, getting to know some people that I could really trust outside of my family that had some skills like a clinician or whatever, it was very helpful because I was able to look and go, who is he? Mm-hmm. Who was he? Where did this start? How did this go? And he had passed, so I couldn't ask him, but I could reflect back to conversations that we had, you know, and why, I guess one of the biggest questions for me as I look back on it was, why is he so, I mean, it's animated. It's like almost a hatred where anything Christian is concerned, you know? And through that thought process, I thought, I mean, he was a Catholic altar boy. He was, you know, like where did these things come from where you start out on this path and end up where he ended up, you know?
And nobody knows. Did he have a molest background? Did he have any of that kind of stuff? You don't know.
You really don't. You really don't. I mean, my dad I'm like the smallest guy in my family sort of thing. And so it was really hard to envision anybody taking advantage of my father, but he was a 10-year-old too at one point, you know.
Did you ever forgive him? Were you able to forgive him?
Yeah, absolutely, for sure.
Okay.
For sure.
I just want to say, you know what, welcome to the family. Thank you for coming and sharing your story of how incredible grace is, how incredible God is, and there is nothing outside of the reach of God. Sometimes we'll say, you know what, that family is too gone, that guy is too gone, she is too lost, they are evil. That's not true. That is not true. And what God says is, if you trust me, if you turn your life around, that I promise you, I will change everything. So if you're out there watching this, remember, turn it around, surrender it. And not just in words only, with the very core of who you are. Mm-hmm. Surrender everything. Until next time, always remember that God is crazy about you. Me too. God bless.